Hey, my name is Milan, and in this video we are going to take a look at the Aspire Docker Publisher, which allows us to convert our .NET Aspire setup into a complete Docker Compose file that you can run on your own servers, and suddenly you're not tied to any cloud provider. Let's dive in. I'm going to start from an empty Visual Studio, and we're going to scaffold a .NET Aspire starter application. We have to give our Aspire app a name. I will be using both HTTPS and Redis just to make the example a bit more interesting, and then let's scaffold the project. This is going to create a couple of projects, the Aspire app host and the service defaults projects. You're probably already familiar with these if you've been using .NET Aspire, and it's also going to scaffold a Blazor Server application and an ASP.NET Core Web API. So what I'm interested in is the app host exclusively, so let's see what we have inside. You can see we're creating a Redis instance with the respective .NET Aspire package, and we are scaffolding our API service and exposing some health checks, and then we are scaffolding the Blazor Server application as the web frontend with external HTTPS endpoints, and we are referencing the Redis cache and the API service. Let me just quickly run this to show you what this looks like in the Aspire dashboard. And when the application starts, this is what you're going to see: our three services, the Redis cache, the API service, and the web frontend. If I open up my Docker desktop, you can see that the Redis container is running using version 7.4, and this is managed by Aspire. We can see our console logs for our services, the structured logs which are exported using OpenTelemetry. We also have distributed traces and metrics. Now let's go back to the resources tab, and I'm going to visit the web frontend application. As I said, this is a Blazor Server application, and what I'm interested in is the weather component, which I'm going to visit a few times. And what this actually does is it reaches out to the web API, and we can confirm this by going to the distributed traces. And if we try to filter for the weather component, we can see the initial request which loaded the component, and it's talking to both the Redis cache, you can see the request here, and our API service. So we have a decently complex application with three components, and we want to deploy it. Now, we don't want to deploy it to any cloud environment, so what other options do we have? Well, I'm going to look for another NuGet package, and I want to install it in the app host project. So I'm going to tick include pre-release, because at the time of recording this video, this NuGet package is still in preview, and it's called Aspire Hosting Docker. It's a Docker Compose publisher for .NET Aspire, and you have a quick sample of how you can use it here. So I'm going to install this, and then we have to make one small change inside of the app host. At the start of the project, I'm going to say builder, add Docker Compose environment, and we can give our environment a name. Now, you can also store this in a variable. This is actually an iResource builder of a Docker Compose environment resource, and there are other publishers available. Some are targeting Kubernetes, some are targeting Azure, and you can have more than one environment inside of your application. In the individual projects, you can define which compute environment you want to use. Don't confuse this with the with environment extension method, which is just for setting environment variables. What we are talking about here is the compute environment. There's also a few more extension methods like publish as Docker Compose service or publish as Dockerfile, where you can provide a callback to configure some additional options. I'm going to let you explore this in your own time. For now, I'm just going to leave this like this, and then let's jump into the CLI. So the next thing we need is the Aspire CLI. If you don't have it installed, you can add it as a global tool by saying .NET tool install global Aspire CLI, and as of recording this video, this is still in pre-release. Now, I already have this tool installed, so this is going to have no effect, but then what I can do is use the Aspire CLI to call the publish command, and I'm also going to specify the output folder where my publish artifacts are going to be placed. So let's go ahead and execute this, and you can see that this is locating the app host project, and then it's going to build it. It's going to detect which images you have inside with a Docker file, build those Docker files into respective images, and it's going to store them locally. And if you wanted to deploy this to some container registry, you can push these images into the respective registry and make them available to your Docker Compose file. So you can see that our publish completed. We have two artifacts, the API service and the web frontend, and the publish artifacts are placed in the infra folder as I specified here in the command. If I open up this folder from VS Code, you will see that we have two files inside, a docker-compose YAML file and an environment file containing some environment variables. So let's take a look at the docker-compose file, and here's what services we have. We have the cache service, the API service, and the web frontend. These service names are identical to what we had in our .NET Aspire setup. The images also use the default images from .NET Aspire. You can always change this by specifying a concrete image that you want to use with a particular service, and then this is the code that's responsible for running our Redis container. Note that we're targeting an environment variable that uses the cache password, and you can find this in the environment file. Now, because this is required, we will have to specify a strong password that we want to use for this variable. There's also the API service image and the web frontend image name, and they are currently using API service latest and web frontend latest, and these images are built and stored locally. You can replace this with a URI inside of your container registry. This could be any public or private container registry, and after building the images with Aspire Publish, you can push these images to the container registry and then make them available to your docker-compose YAML file. Now, the API service is next. You can see the configuration here, which image we're using, some environment variables, and exposing the ports that are available locally. It's also targeting the Aspire network. We're going to see it in the end. And then here's the Blazor server, very similar stuff. The connection string for our Redis cache is automatically set inside of our docker-compose setup, and there's also the service discovery setting that's targeting our API service and making it available on HTTP API service 8001. So then at the end we have our network setup, which is just a bridge network in docker-compose. So once we have our docker-compose YAML file, what can we do next? I will go back to my console and I'm going to go into the infra folder, and once I'm inside of this folder, I'm going to say docker-compose up, and I want to run this in detached mode, and then this is going to read my docker-compose YAML file, create the required network, and then the services, which you can see here. So all of my services are started. If we open up Docker Desktop, you can see that this is indeed the case. We have our free services, and if I go to the port for the web frontend, you'll be able to see that my Blazor Server application is available, and we are able to access the weather component, which interacts with my API service. Now, one thing we are missing in this setup is the Aspire dashboard. Setting this up from scratch is a bit more complicated, so I'm going to leave that for a separate video, but I want to show you how to install a different monitoring tool and have it deployed with Docker Compose. Let's go back to the CLI and say Docker Compose down. This is going to stop my free containers, and then I'm going to go back to Visual Studio. From here, I want to install a .NET Aspire package inside of my app host, and I want to look for Seek, and I want to install the latest version of Aspire hosting Seek. I'm going to do the same in my two client applications, the API. So let's go ahead and add a .NET Aspire package. I'm going to look for Seek, and let's install the latest stable version, and let's do the same in the Aspire web app. So I'm going to say add .NET Aspire package, look for Seek, and install the latest version. From here, we have to configure Seek with .NET Aspire and our two services. So I'm going to say var Seek and then builder add Seek. We have to give our service a name. We have to accept the end user license agreement. So I'm going to specify the environment variable name and the value of yes. Another thing we can do is set the container lifetime. And for example, I'm going to use the container lifetime of persistent, which is going to persist my container between application starts. And this can be useful for making your .NET Aspire development faster. Now I'm going to add a reference to the Seek resource to my web API, and I'm also going to wait for it from the API service, and then let's do the same in my web application. So it's also going to depend on Seek. Now the next thing I need to do is to configure Seek in my client application. So right here, I'm going to say builder, add Seek endpoint, and let's specify our resource name, which is just Seek. And I have to do the same in my API service right here, and let's start the application again. Now I am running it locally first with .NET Aspire, just to show you that our services are going to spin up correctly. If we take a look at the API service, you can see that it's going to get a connection string to our Seek instance, which is available here, and I can navigate to Seek, and you can see that we do have some logs inside. Now let me go back to the Aspire dashboard, and I want to open up my web application and just navigate once to the weather component, and then I'm going back to Seek, and you can see our distributed trace here accessing the weather component, and it also shows our request to the weather forecast endpoint on the API service. So this is all working well with local .NET Aspire, but can we publish this using the Docker Compose publisher? So let's repeat the same steps as before. I'm going to go back to the root directory, then I'm going to call Aspire publish and output everything into the infra folder. This is going to take a couple of moments. It's going to build my two services, the API service and the web frontend, and then we should get an updated Docker Compose YAML file. So let's see if this is the case. If I open up the Docker Compose YAML file, you can see that we now have our Seek service and it's available on port 8001. In the API service and the web frontend, there's now a new environment variable, the connection string to Seek, and is targeting Seek on the locally available port. And in this case, we are using service discovery that's available inside of our Docker network. This is why we can say Seek and then specify the Seek port. So now all that's left to do is go back to the infra folder and then say Docker Compose up. And I'm going to again run it in detached mode. It's going to start all of my containers. If I open up Docker Desktop, you can see the 4 containers are running. I'm going to navigate to the Seek URI, and right now this is what we have in Seek. In the background, I'm going to access the weather component, and you can see the distributed trace and the structured logs show up, and these are all made available through the Seek integration. Now notice that the service name isn't specified here, so we don't really know which application generated which distributed trace. So if you want to solve this, here's what you have to do. Back inside of our .NET application, I'm going to go into the Add Service Defaults and then configure OpenTelemetry, and here I'm going to say configure resource, and let's specify the resource name by calling the add service method, and I'm going to say builder environment application name, and this is what I want to use for distinguishing my distributed traces. So if I republish my application through the CLI and I started again using Docker Compose up, and then I navigate back to Seek, you can see that now our service names are available inside of Seek. So we can see the traces generated by the Blazor web app, which is called aspireapp.web, and then we have our one trace from the API service, which is called Aspire App API service. So this is a quick demo of how you can use the new Docker publisher to generate a fully valid Docker Compose YAML file that you can now push into any private server that you want to run and start running your applications free of any cloud provider. If you want to grab my free .NET Aspire template, you can do that from the pinned comment right below. And if you want to learn more about how to build a complete CI/CD pipeline that takes a Docker file, turns it into a Docker image, pushes that into a container registry, and then deploys your application, I highly recommend that you check out this video next. Also, take a look at my courses if you want to improve your software architecture skills, and until next time, stay awesome.